Okay, picture this. You're sitting in a dark theater, watching some diabolical mastermind's grand scheme unfold. And if you're being completely honest with yourself, a tiny part of you is secretly hoping they actually pull it off, aren't you? Well, let's dive into this explainer because today we're going to decode a truly fascinating psychological paradox, our absolute obsession with the villain. Logically, whether we're watching a massive sci-fi epic or a high-stakes bank heist, we all know exactly who we're supposed to cheer for, the hero, right? So why do we so often find ourselves drawn to characters who embody literally everything we're taught to reject? It's genuinely one of the greatest mysteries of human entertainment. A recent study highlighted by BBC Science Focus hit the nail right on the head with this phenomenon. They pointed out that a compelling plot absolutely requires conflict, and the antagonist? Well, they deliver exactly that. Put simply, when the villain appears, the fun begins. The more villainous the character, the more entertained we are. They provide this essential, driving conflict that just captivates our brains and keeps us glued to the screen. Section 1, Rooting for the Bad Guy. Let's explore exactly why our brains naturally gravitate toward the dark side in fiction. So here is a truly wild psychological paradox. Studies show that even when we easily recognize a villain's actions as undeniably bad, we almost always suspect that they're actually good on the inside. We have this natural reflex to look for a hidden moral compass in characters doing terrible things. And the crazy part? We often completely invent this goodness, despite a total glaring lack of evidence in the story itself. And this brilliantly illustrates what researchers call the Gordian knot of media psychology. According to a major concept called affective disposition theory, or ADT, we are untiring moral monitors. This theory says that whether or not we like a character is strictly determined by our continuous judgments of their morality. Okay, but if we're constantly judging right from wrong, how can we possibly like immoral characters? It feels like a total contradiction. Section 2, Anti-Villains and Ambiguity.
Here's what happens when writers intentionally blur the lines of right and wrong to play with those moral monitors.
This brings us right to the anti-villain. Basically, this is a villain committing evil acts, but they're doing it in service to a goal that is arguably pretty noble. Think of characters like Magneto from X-Men or Ozymandias from Watchmen. They actively want to improve the world or protect people, but man, they use some wildly unacceptable, destructive methods to do it. And they're absolutely fascinating because they force us to pause and re-examine our own perspectives. Now contrast that with the sympathetic villain. These are the characters who have deeply relatable origins or a tragic past that gives them a ton of emotional depth. But their ultimate goals, they're petty, they're personal, or they're just purely malignant. They don't want to save the world. They might just want to watch it burn. Yet we still feel sorry for them because of everything they've been through. So, the core difference really comes down to this. Anti-villains spark deep philosophical debate. They make stories morally complex by actively challenging the hero's worldview. Sympathetic villains, on the other hand, mainly just play right on our emotions. They highlight the sheer tragedy of how easily a regular person can be pushed into darkness. Section 3, Moral Disengagement and Excuses. How exactly does the brain let us sit back, relax, and actually enjoy this darkness? Well, there are two main academic views on how we pull this off. Cognitive media theory suggests we're mostly attracted to a villain's non-moral traits, like we like them because they're charming, witty, or stylish, like Hannibal Lecter's urbane sophistication. But on the flip side, affective disposition theory argues that we actually actively justify their crimes. We're cognitively mitigating their bad deeds just so we can keep enjoying the story without feeling super guilty about it. The mechanics behind this moral disengagement are honestly fascinating. We minimize, we rationalize, and we reinterpret. For instance, we might compare a bad guy to someone else in the story who's even worse. It's an advantageous comparison that basically gives us permission to root for our favorite rogue. We literally convince ourselves that their terrible actions are totally justified by the circumstances. But hey, sometimes we skip making excuses entirely. Sometimes we don't approve of the villain at all. We just admire their sheer, undeniable power. Academics actually call this sublimity. We become fascinated by a character's status, their dynamism, and their pure capacity to force their will upon the world. Think about the booming, unstoppable presence of someone like Darth Vader. We don't agree with him, no way, but we are absolutely mesmerized by his agency. Section 4, the dark triad connection. Now, let's drop the twist and look at what happens when the reason we like the villain is actually deeply rooted in our own personalities. Check out this super interesting study from researchers at Aarhus University. They hypothesize that instead of just finding excuses for villains, some people engage positively with them because they actually share some of those dark traits themselves. They basically wanted to see if dark personalities naturally prefer dark characters. To do this, they looked at the dark triad of personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. And the results? Incredibly revealing. They found that psychopathy and Machiavellianism are particularly strong predictors for liking a villain, meaning individuals who score higher in these specific traits are far more likely to feel empathy, fascination, and even identification with fictional bad guys. The researchers tied this whole thing to a concept called unmitigated agency. Basically, this is a hyper-focus on the self to the absolute exclusion of everyone else. It's high agency combined with incredibly low communion. Essentially, it's an antisocial, destructive form of dominance. And viewers who score higher in unmitigated agency, they are significantly more likely to identify with and enjoy dark characters, kind of finding a kindred spirit in the villain's ruthless pursuit of what they want. Section 5. Parasocial villain friendships. Let's see how all this builds into actual one-sided relationships with these highly morally ambiguous characters. We develop what psychologists call parasocial relationships. These are enduring, totally one-sided social bonds we form with media characters that actually outlast the viewing experience. And it turns out, audiences can form real, lasting parasocial friendships with villains. What's wild is that the strength of these somewhat bizarre friendships is heavily influenced by the viewer's very own moral foundation. To really get this, we need to look at intuitive morality theory, which breaks our moral judgment down into 5 foundations: care, fairness, loyalty, authority, and purity. These are the 5 lenses we use to judge literally every action a character takes on screen. And this perfectly highlights just how selective our outrage can actually be. Research shows that as long as a character isn't directly hurting innocent people, which violates care, or betraying their friends, which violates loyalty, we will easily, effortlessly overlook them breaking the law, which is an authority violation, or doing drugs, which is a purity violation. If a villain is fiercely loyal to their crew, we'll often maintain a super strong parasocial bond with them, just completely ignoring all their other crimes. Section 6. Meaning in the madness. Finally, let's look at why exposing ourselves to these dark, morally challenging characters might actually be really good for us. Ultimately, engaging with villains isn't just about cheap thrills. Studies show that whether we're actively making choices in a video game or passively watching a movie, facing these morally complex situations inspires what researchers call moral rumination. It genuinely challenges us. It creates a much deeper sense of meaningfulness, pushing us to reflect on our own real-life values and wonder, what would I do in that impossible situation? So the very next time you find yourself entirely captivated by some diabolical mastermind on the big screen, maybe take a step back. Analyze your own media habits. Does your favorite antagonist just happen to have a really great sense of style? Or are they revealing some hidden psychological truth about your own moral boundaries? What does your favorite bad guy say about you? Keep that in mind next time you grab your popcorn. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the story.